Hi, I'm Deborah Hamilton. Welcome to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? 10 years ago, with my iPhone and a script, I recorded the first episode of the Ultimate Pet Resolution Summit, which chatted with experts about conflicts over animals. Our conversations were intimate, honest, and illustrated how disagreements over animals occur and how those disagreements can reshape people's lives and relationships. In November 2019, I started Why Do Pets Matter, a new podcast that continued these informative discussions. I'm so excited to have you here with me, continuing my exploration into a more meaningful conversation about why pets matter to all of us. My guests and I will share ideas, stories, and experiences straight from the heart, unscripted and holistic. From the bravest moments to the most brokenhearted, we will explore how to resolve disagreements over animals differently. One thing I know for sure is I want to have more meaningful conversations that will help all of us unlock that deeply felt human-animal bond that drives the emotions of conflict. Today we're speaking with Valarie Adams. Oh my God, what a wonderful conversation we had about grief and mourning. She also has a blog, Confides in Animals. It is fabulous. We talk about grief and how to address it, how to listen instead of give your feelings about grief. Listen to people who are going through grief. I have never had such a heartfelt conversation about palliative care and hospice as I've had with Valarie. You're really going to love this one. So let's hear what Valarie has to say. Hi, Deborah Hamilton, and today I'm with Valarie Adams, a very dear friend. I'll tell you that up front. She's a retired vet nurse. She's a writer, a blogger, an end-of-life consultant, but also an anticipatory grief consultant. So I'm going to introduce you to her today because I think you'll find her as fascinating as I do. So welcome, Valarie.
Thank you, Deborah. I just excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited for you to be here too. We've been trying to get together for the longest of times, and now we're here. So, of course, as we always do, why do pets matter to you, Valarie?
Such a great question. I gave this a whole lot of thought. And in meditating about this, because, there's all the obvious answers, I think that pets matter because we matter. We're part of the package. We matter because they matter, and they matter because we matter. We're a messy species, and our relationships are pretty complicated from time to time. I think our relationships are complicated from time to time with our pets too, and I think that varies at stages of life. So that's the short answer to that. I think they matter because we matter. Through history, they've been a part of our lives.
They really have impacted our lives. And I'd love for you to expand on the complicatedness of that relationship between people and pets.
Yes. So I think that I really started recognizing the complications in 1980 when my house burnt down. And at the time I had 2 cats and 2 dogs. And my husband and I had been married for 3 years at the time. 3 of them I brought into the marriage, and 1 we got together. When we lost everything, of course, I'll use the word devastate, but I think paralyzed is probably a little more accurate. And the first thing people said to me is, thank God you didn't have children in the house, because we weren't home when the house went down. And so thank God you didn't have kids. And I didn't know what to say. I was speechless for so many reasons, but when someone would say that to me, I didn't know what to say. And I literally didn't say a word.
Yeah.
That was 1980. So 1980 was a different time in our society. Well-meaning people were offering kittens and puppies, and that was all wonderful. Their intention was very good. Their intention was to assuage our pain. But I could no, I couldn't accept any of those creatures, that they were offering with so much care. So, after time went on, and I think I lost about 2 years there where I don't remember a whole lot, and society is not very supportive, wasn't very supportive then, when you would lose animals. And of course, in such a devastating way, all everybody could think about was, thank goodness you weren't home.
Right.
No
And
one
you
was
survived,
acknowledged.
right. And you survived.
Oh.
And yet, as pet owners, sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, we wish we wouldn't, because to go forward without them is so difficult.
Oh, I wanted to go. I had no, and I was a young person at the time, and I didn't understand the attachment and the relationship. So it was all incredibly traumatic, and there was really no one supporting that. So I think that was my first glimmer of, I'm a little strange.
You and I both. Are you kidding? We're both strange, because I'm sitting here thinking, the things that would have run through my head would have been, I didn't take very good care of them. I left them in a situation that was perilous to them, and I didn't even know it, but that didn't matter. I'm still mad at myself.
Well, that doesn't scratch the surface, but yes, that was actually the beginning of a whole lot of work that had to be done internally. Around 1989, I said to a boss at the time, because by 1989, I had graduated as a veterinary nurse in 1973. So they didn't even know what we were at that time.
Yeah.
So by 1989, I had a very good relationships with my clients, and I think that experience in 1980 gave me this opening of empathy and opening of understanding. And so naturally, that was the kind of vibe I was giving off. So I was kind of like a magnet for people coming my way that felt pretty misunderstood about the relationship with their pets. So I said to my boss at the time, I said, I think we could probably use some grief support groups for pet loss in the area. And that was pretty much received like I had three heads.
Why would we want to get involved with that? Because it's only going to be difficult, and you're going to be keeping the people on the thought, not that they weren't already on the thought all the time, right? But that you're going to keep it and perpetuate it. And so let's just help them move on.
Replace, that replacement thing. So I think that led me on a path. I think that the house burning down in 1980 put my feet on a path into a direction that I don't know that I would have gone on without that experience. So through my career, which has been long and varied, I found my way in emergency critical care. And that after many years in emergency critical care work, that gave me such an opportunity to see where end of life needs for pet owners were not really being met. And they didn't have a whole lot of folks that they probably maybe understood what they were going through, but maybe not necessarily knew where to point them in a direction to heal or to navigate their way through that. So I think when it comes to how messy our relationships are, what I got to see firsthand, and especially delivering hospice and palliative care to pets, which I did for 6 years, that led me into understanding all the different relationships we have with our pets and how our experiences and how we've grown up, that we bring all of that to the table with them. You know, my blog is called Confides in Animals. And I think I decided that I liked that name because of the safety factor with them.
Yep.
You're probably like me and millions of other people out there where we can say out loud to them the things that we don't feel comfortable, safe, and trusting saying to another human. They will absorb it. They will soak it up. And the wonderful magic that they have gives that balm back to us to soothe that wound if we have one that needs healing.
They always seem to listen intently, understand us completely, and provide us with that grounding we need in the moment.
There's no question in my mind that many of us who share the pets in our lives like we do. The other one that was always hit me was, gosh, they're just like family, aren't they? My family members were in the house.
Yeah.
Is what I wanted to shout, you know, the bubble over my head. There's all these bubbles over our heads, you know, where it's
say what exactly what you want to say in the moment, but thankfully we have invisible duct tape that stops us.
Yeah. So we will come home and say that to our pets.
Do you believe that Valarie said this? Doesn't she understand what you mean to me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, one time, a colleague did it, actually held one of my dog's faces and said, "Oh my goodness, such a little face, such a little head. Do you have a brain? Where do you put your brain?" And of course, there was the bubble over my head. And I won't tell you what I was thinking about the brain that she had at the time.
Exactly. You know, it's interesting because we're so in tune with our pets and we want to do what's best for our pets. And I love that you spoke about end of life counseling, because it really, you know, unfortunately or fortunately, should begin at the beginning, because every day is a gift. Every day is a gift. We don't have a crystal ball. And so understanding that these wonderful lives are with us for a short period of time, and we should give ourselves wholeheartedly to them because they're going to repay us, what, 100-fold. But also being aware that they are going to leave us, most of them, before we leave, and how to really, I think the only word I can use is survive it.
I think survive is a good word. And I think this is a large topic that we've been talking about for a long time. And the emergence of more and more hospice and palliative care groups out there for pets. When we had our Healing Heart Foundation, which we got our nonprofit status in 2008, and eventually dissolved it in 2014. It was a nonprofit, which I was so glad to have a nonprofit, which meant we could be in service. Part of our reasoning was there are people out there who are on fixed incomes and benefit so greatly from the human-animal bond that we wanted to be able to offer those services to anyone. Because veterinary medicine moves so fast, because there is so much to do in keeping them well, that when it comes to end of life, now we're looking at a societal problem. We're looking at a little bit of a paralyzation as far as society and talking about end of life. We don't like to talk about it with ourselves, much less our pets, who are going to live, this compared to our own lifespans, this tiny little fraction of time. And so it's complicated because we get them knowing that, and yet you can't hang on the fact that you're going to lose them early. That takes the joy away. So it's a crazy little walk we do. And I think if we were to start these discussions earlier on, as far and incorporate it in with wellness, and incorporate it with nature, and incorporate it in with all the rest of our conversations, then we are more apt to kind of ease in. We talk about an easing into things. But instead, it's a complete rejection. We won't look at it. We won't talk about it. It's not going to happen. And then when we're there, it's devastating. And I am the poster child for that.
Yeah.
Totally there, totally. So when I do end of life consults, I think some of the trust that I gain is because I'm one of them. I say, I'm the hand holder. I'm the one that's you're going to have to sedate me. You're going to have to. And so they're like, yeah, I'm there. So I say, okay, we have our tribe. And once you feel that people are understanding of it, and that you're not odd, you're not somebody that somebody's going to talk down to. These are conversations we should be having with more of a ease, with more of a relaxation and trust and safety.
And I think the going along with that is the ability to listen, just listen to the stories and listen to the heartfelt experiences people had with the pet, and understanding. I know that it oftentimes, and you said it at the beginning, people were offering you puppies and kittens right after to try to, have you move on. And I think that veterinary medicine, and especially end of life care that's coming down the pike now, recognizes we need to allow for the grief of this pet. And if the loss is addressed and appreciated and acknowledged, then moving on to something that might happen, might not happen. I often wonder how I would live without a dog, because I've always had them since I was like 5. And my statement to myself out loud is, I wouldn't give up a minute of sharing my life with each dog that has graced my life, to avoid living that one not so great event. Because just think how different our lives would be if they weren't in it. Each of the dogs and cats that died in the house, there wasn't a moment where you probably said, well, I wish I'd never had them, because now I wouldn't feel this terrible pain. But rather, every minute with them, I revel in, and I'm so glad I have it. And then whether or not you can do that again is always a personal choice.
Yes. I think that, first of all, it takes a lot of time. And that's part of the problem, and why it's so wonderful that the emergence of some of these organizations are around now, is because it takes time. And when we're trying to keep your pet well, there's not a great deal of time for these kinds of conversations. When I would do an end-of-life consult, the first thing often I would start with would be, tell me a story about. And we would start with a story, because it's where the stories, that's where all the good stuff is.
Yep.
Good stuff. All of that takes a great deal of time, and it takes heart listening.
Yep. Listening for
Beyond
understanding,
symptoms.
right? And compassion and empathy, not anything else, but just to be there listening.
Beyond symptoms. In between the lines. So it does take time, and time is something now that and when you go to your doctor, human or otherwise, they're pretty pinched for time right these days. That's the first thing. The second thing is I think if we had more conversations about honoring and taking the time to do grief the way grief should be done. As Alan Wolfelt would say, if you grieve well, you can move on to mourning, which is the action part of grief.
Yep.
So there's honoring that must be done. I think that I probably would have fared out a little bit better had there been an affirmation, an acknowledgement, somebody to say, oh my God, you went through this and you lost them, and I can't imagine, and tell me. So asking someone to bare their soul, it is a great opening and an honoring of a very big sacredness. I think that space is a sacred space. And whenever I was invited into that space, I considered it sacred space to be sitting in. And I think we need to be conversing about it a little bit more.
I couldn't agree with you more. I loved the definition or the distinction that you made between grief and mourning. I'd love for you to chat a little bit more about that, because it is two separate pieces of the process that we all go through. I know for me, I am stoic. My husband always says to me, I don't know how you move on. So I'll take a minute.
He's assuming that you have.
Exactly. Because you don't. And they come to you in moments. And I apologize to my audience, but I knew this was going to happen because I am a horrible compartmentalizer. So the loss of all my dogs are compartmentalized. And so when I talk about them, this happens, but yet I can go on for days thinking the way I think before, which was, I'm so grateful they were in my life. But I don't think there's a day, and probably not for you as well, that goes by where we don't think of them, the ones who have left footprints on our hearts. So that's why I would love for you to talk about the grief, which is, of course, the immediate thing that happens. Excuse me. And then the mourning.
Well, our wonderful Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she was the one that kind of blew this all apart and came up with all sorts of stages of grief. And of course, she was the first one to articulate all that as broadly as she did. So, and then, of course, we moved on and we learned so much more about it after her groundbreaking business, and realized that, yes, all of that was true. And in fact, it didn't always go according to the outline, because we're people and we have messy backgrounds often. And the pets we have different spaces and take up different spaces depending on who we are. I think initially with something like a trauma, and of course working emergency critical care, and I took the second shift, which was 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. So that's like all the bewitching times.
Right.
And I did that by choice. So
we as pet owners always know shit hits the fan in the middle of the night. Yeah.
And I took that by choice. So I'm not sure what that says about me, but, and holidays, so that I could hopefully help my colleagues out a little bit who had children, small children. So I did not have small children. And so working holidays was not a problem. You can imagine what Christmas Eves were like and Christmas days were like. Mm-hmm. So there's some beautiful stories wrapped around that, those types of events too. And I'll tell you what I take issue with a little bit. I take issue, I think, with two things in particular when they talk about grief. And I take issue with denial, because denial is not something that I have seen very, very often. Someone could have probably said, Valerie's in denial. They could have probably put that label on, and nothing would have been further from the truth. So denial is one of those labels that sometimes is cloaked in something else. And so when I would hear somebody, as we were walking through the ICU, this person is in denial about this pet. And I'd say, no, they're not. I'd say, well, what do you mean? I said, they know exactly what's going on. They know they're going to lose this dog or this cat. They know it. It's just that we're in the beginning now. And I always used to say that your brain needed a little pillow to lean on for a while when you get that crushing news, or it's hit you like a ton of brick. What's going to happen? And there's shock. And so shock comes along, and shock has this really nice pillow and says, why don't you just lay your head down for just a little bit? Let's just take just a break. And so they would label that as denial. That would always kind of wrinkle me a little bit. I don't really care for denial. I think that most of the time, anybody that I've ever spoken with has known exactly what's going on. I knew what happened when we pulled up, when they called me. I knew exactly what had happened. Somebody could have said I was in shock or denial. Shock would have been accurate. Denial would not have been.
Please keep your second thought, because denial is perfect. I just want to share with you that is absolutely true. I've had several clients who've had that happen, but I myself had that happen when my dog broke her femur. And so I had been in dogs for years, and I told myself she tore her cruciate.
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh, it's cruciate. And then, I always think my angels take good care of me. I said that I'm going to keep her home tonight, and we're going to make her comfortable, and I'll take her to the Animal Medical Center tomorrow morning. And we did. And I've never done that. I've always rushed to the emergency room, but it was a cruciate, right? So it was fine. Mm-hmm. And she was comfortable. And then I went into the Animal Medical Center, and I told them I think she tore a cruciate, and they took her away on a gurney. And my girlfriend said, oh, come in, sit with me, because she probably thought I was in denial. But like the pillow, I was not seeing anything but a torn cruciate on any planet. Now, I have Irish setters. Osteosarcoma is a huge issue. I had talked to myself for years about what I would do if one of my dogs came up with osteosarcoma, and never crossed my mind until the phone rang and the vet called her and told her what the x-ray showed. And she goes, I'm so sorry. Daisy has osteosarcoma and her femur is broken. Mm. And I burst into tears. And it was the first time that my brain allowed, my head was off the pillow, right? The denial was gone. My head was off the pillow. And I said, okay. And then, of course, everybody comes at you with solutions. And I had already, like you said, we don't talk about it enough to know what we're going to do when something comes our way. And they all had a bunch of solutions. And I left her there to have her leg amputated the next day. But I told the vet, wait, I need to really meditate on this. And I called him at 9:00 in the morning and said, I'm coming to get her. And I have to say, so this vet was very good, because he came out and talked to me and said, you're absolutely right. The Daisy you would take home after surgery would be a different Daisy than you brought in. He said, so that you would have to come to terms with, and you have. And so he said, we will, give her a nice fentanyl patch, and she'll go home. And my vet was going to meet me at the house, and we were going to help her across to the Rainbow Bridge. And as my vet and I were chatting about and crying about Daisy got up off the bed that we had, laid in the sunshine, looked at us as much as to say, could you two really get off your butts and let me go because this is starting to hurt a little. And I'll never forget that because it was probably the only dog I let go who told me to let her go. She told me in no uncertain terms. My vet turned to me and she said, I don't think I've ever had a dog tell me so clearly that she was ready. And I think that makes it a little bit easier, if I can use that term. But when you
Sure.
talk about denial, I sat there and I went, yeah, totally. Didn't even think about it. My head was on that pillow for the longest time.
Yeah. I talk in terms of mind, body, spirit. And I use it a lot in different areas. And this is one area that I use it a lot. When I was ministering to hospice patients, I would tell families they do this so much better than we do. Know this and believe this because it's truth. I don't think we can leave this to speculation.
No.
And when I was lecturing on the subject, I would always, I'd run across every now and again, there are people who feel very strongly about taking a life, that taking a life is something we shouldn't be doing. And someone got me into quite a conversation at a conference one time, and I came home. And at the time, my husband and I had our 16-year-old Sergio. No, Sergio was 17 or 18 at the time. Now, he'd had nursing care all his life, and I won't get into Sergio's issues, but Sergio lived to be 20 years old. And it got to the point where it was not good for me to be nursing him anymore. And so, and something happened then that made it absolutely obvious it was time to go. But what I discovered when I meditated on that, and it helped me lecture the next time on it, is I said, if Sergio would have been an outside kitty, he would have fallen ill. He would have not felt better without any intervention, and he would have sought someplace under a bush or under a tree or someplace for cover because it becomes very primal at that time. I don't care if you have 4 legs or 2 legs. When we're leaving the earth and transitioning, it gets very primal. And he would have done that because that would have been a primal response to coming to the end of life on this planet in that form. So he would have crawled off because he wouldn't have wanted to put himself out in the open for a predator. It's just what he would have done. And then he would have died either by lack of food or water or by a predator. But the point was is that he would have gone on to his next process, however he died.
They don't have the fear we have.
No. And when we bring them in our homes, when we had started to do domestication and insist that we be the caretaker of everything in their lives, everything, food, shelter, medical care, we are the overseer. When we take that on, I think that's a sacred contract to me. And so the next time I lectured, I said, and this is for people who really struggle with the idea of taking a life. If my Sergio were out in the wild, he would have eventually died, and I don't know how, but that would have been how nature would have done it. I took the responsibility on of bringing him into my life, into my care. I committed. And so I saw that commitment from beginning till end.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of explained that end of it.
Yeah. It's important to be open to how everyone thinks about how they care for their pets. And it's important to remember that pets don't fear death. They live in the moment. And yes, if they were not as anthropomorphized as we make them now, and I'm not criticizing that, I'm just pointing out a fact that we've put all sorts of things in them that's probably quite true. They do feel, they do think, they do have social lives, they do have everything that we didn't think they might have had. Yet they live in the moment, which is a blessing. I wish I could do more of it. And they're grounded and they recognize when it's time and they're not afraid. And we, as their beloved caregivers, caretakers, need to recognize that too. And instead of possibly going to extenuating lengths, and this is always a personal choice. But for me, I like to let them go while they're still enjoying their good days, as opposed to when they are there for me, because I can't let them go. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I think that end of life consults come into play here, because the struggle that goes on, and I am blessed in that I have colleagues in my tribe that I can go to and say, I think I'm losing my perspective here. I don't, and I've had to do that a couple of different times, where even as a professional, I've had to say, I think I'm losing my perspective, and I could use you to help me bounce some things off of. Again, it's time. It takes time. It takes somebody who's a good listener. It takes someone you trust. It takes a feeling of safety. Usually, if it's somebody who doesn't have any skin in the game. My husband, when it came to Sergio, was absolutely no help at all, because if it was me, I think I would have probably let Sergio go earlier. And I would say that in my lectures and say, he never would have lasted as long as he lasted had his mommy not been a nurse. There's no way. There's no way, because I went to the things I could do with him at home, the average person would not have been able to do. So I think that those conversations are essential. And I think that it's important that somebody find somebody with a background in your veterinary clinic that you trust, if there's someone in there, or there's lots of different resources and options now that we didn't have before. But I would urge people have the conversation early, even when there's just some nagging little discernments you're trying to make. The bigger discernments come, later on. So navigating them early on with someone you trust, I think is real helpful.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I think if you start with the little ones, that then when the big ones come, you have your support system there that you trust to give you an objective, neutral, but compassionate conversation, because they will listen. I think that when you pointed out that denial isn't that, it's actually the pillow, I thought that was great. And I think maybe the second part that I interrupted you, and I apologize, would have been the deep perspective conversation with someone you trust, because it really is that piece that you can lose sight of, and that you, on your best day, you can see it. And then on your worst day, it's totally amorphous and you can't see it at all. So being able to have people to go to have that conversation, either professionals who are trained to help listen and help you navigate this discussion, is imperative. And if you're in the field like you are, having colleagues, and then giving conferences to both professionals and pet owners, I think is an enormous piece of the 21st century pet ownership that has come to pass. Because, as you said at the beginning, people in the 1980s and 90s, and even in the early 2000s, weren't as attached to their pets as they are now. Now, in the 21st century, it is a whole different ballgame. Mark Cushing just wrote a book called Pet Nation, where the dogs went from the backyard in the doghouse through the back door into the house, onto our beds, at the dinner table. And now they're out the front door going on trips with us on the airplane, going to restaurants with us. So this is such a different, when you lost the dogs in the 80s, the perspective and perception of pet ownership was so different. And now, as you rightly put it, they are members of our family. They are our companions. They are our confidants. And understanding that both as a pet owner and as a non-pet owner and as a pet, professional is really key to helping people navigate their life with their pet.
Two things. I think, family and friends love you, so they always want to fix. And there are some things that just can't be fixed. They're not meant to be fixed. I love how Alan Wolfelt, because he's, to me, has such a handle on the whole grief field. He says, grief is not something that needs fixing. It's part of our life. We all go through it. I always say to people, I got news for you. None of us are getting out alive.
Yeah.
And that's the truth.
And grief isn't being fixed anytime soon.
No, nor should it be. Nor should it be. It is not something to fix. It is something to reconcile. It is something to grow with. And that's where mind, body, spirit comes in for me, because I think we tend to mind and body, and we don't always tend to spirit.
Yeah.
And however that is defined by you, how you define that. And if we put 10 people in a room, we're probably going to get 10 different ideas on what spirit means to them. But their pets are in the middle of that. I can guarantee it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're coming to the end. I would love for one last tidbit for everyone who has a pet, young or old, people or animals. What would be the most important piece of this puzzle to start working on now? Their takeaway, their call to action. What would that be?
I like to find an advocate. I like people to find someone who they can use as a liaison, either between them and them. Sometimes we need liaisons for ourselves too. Or to find somebody within their veterinary or whatever their animal world. You travel in a lot of different circles, and so people travel in different circles with their pets. And while well-meaning friends and family are always important, I think it's really important too to find a person who kind of stands out from all that, has a little different, broader perspective, perhaps, can come at some of the crossroads that you're going to come with, maybe with a little different ideas. Not necessarily asking you to do anything or fix something, but to understand and clarify where you are. How do you feel about things? How do you feel about some of these ailments that your pets may come up with? How do you feel about them? Oftentimes we reflect how we feel about them with ourselves. So I'll have people say, well, if my dog got this kind of cancer, I wouldn't treat it because of that kind of cancer. If I got that kind of cancer, I wouldn't treat it for myself. Well, that's a good start. It's a good start for a conversation. So who do you have in your life that you can have these conversations with, that you trust, that isn't going to just tell you what to do, but maybe will explore a little bit where you're coming from?
I love that. Trying to find someone in your life to explore these conversations with is probably the most important piece. And that might not be your family. It might not be your vet.
No.
It might be a friend. It might be your vet. It might be any of those people, but you really have to look for that. It's sort of like my map plan. You have to make a plan. You have to really figure out who this person is, who will help you have this contemplative conversation that feeds your soul. because that's mind, but I love the mind, body, spirit. It's so key for me. Valarie, I am so sad we've run out of time, but I am going to have you back on because I think that most of my listeners are going to really want to explore this conversation, how to have this conversation, how to address this conversation with others, both be that person in someone else's life and someone be that person in their life. So will you come back? Do you promise?
Love it.
Perfect. So
Love
this is
you.
Deborah Hamilton. I love you too. This is Deborah Hamilton, Hamilton Law and Mediation and the Why Do Pets Matter podcast. Until next time, kiss your pets for me. And I love you all. Take care. The Why Do Pets Matter podcast drops every Thursday and can be found on whichever platform you find your podcast. Subscribe now, invite your friends, and I cannot wait to have you join me in these conversations.